Hi everyone, welcome to our third introductory Rhino video for Com 1. This is just going to be a shorter video, but it's going to be specifically about using layers in Rhino. So layers are incredibly important. They're essential to file organization, and you can't really create a complex drawing or even a relatively basic drawing without using the layers function. So to start us off, I'm going to just go up here and create a series of rectangles. So type in rectangle, hold shift to create one, select that rectangle, type in copy, select that point, hold shift, and just drag them along. So we've got, there we go, 5 rectangles. So there's just using a few of those commands that we used in the last video there. If you're confused about what I just did or how I did that, you need to go back and watch the second video where I go through all the commands we're going to be using in this course. Great, so in front of me I've got 5 rectangles. You'll notice that all the line work is black, and the reason the line work appears black isn't just because that's how lines appear in Rhino, because they're actually on a black layer. So if I go over to my layers panel, I'm just going to make it large here just by dragging that line up there. You'll notice that there's a blue dot here next to the default layer. If I click on that layer, it's going to highlight blue. And if you notice here, the color black is there. And what this means is that I'm drawing currently on the default layer. And that's indicated by this blue dot here. So that's the layer that I've selected. If I click on it there, it highlights just so you can see. Click away to deselect it. That means that I'm drawing on the default layer. If I click this button here on layer 1, which is the red layer, and I draw a rectangle now, you'll notice already that the little icon on my mouse is red. If I click and hold shift and re-click then you'll see that I've got a red rectangle. This indicates that this rectangle is on the red layer. And I can repeat this for the other layers. If I select this little icon here, and I select the purple layer and I type in rectangle, and I click and I drag and I click, now the rectangle is purple. I can do it again for the blue layer. Rectangle, click, click, and now I've got a blue rectangle. For the green layer, click, click, now I've got a green rectangle. And for the white layer, rectangle, click, click, and now I've got a white rectangle. So you can see that I've got up here a series of different colored rectangles now, and each one of those colors corresponds to a layer color that I drew on. This is how you begin to organize your file. So there's tons and tons of things we can do with these layer options. Now the first thing to note is you don't just have to draw on a layer in order for objects to be on that layer. So I'm just going to delete these rectangles here, so just drag and select those, hit delete, now they're gone. You can also move objects to other layers. So if I select the first rectangle and I go over to my layers panel and I right click on layer 1, I get a whole series of options, and they'll be quite similar on PC. The option that I'm looking for at the moment is the change object layer function. So just to go over that again, I select that first rectangle, I go over to my layers panel, I right click on layer 1, and I go down to change object layer. If I click that, then I click away and deselect the object, you'll notice that the rectangle has become red. That means that I've moved it onto layer 1 there. I can do the same for the next rectangle, so I can click on that and I can change object layer on layer 1, and I can also put it on layer 1. If I want to put this object on layer 2, then I just go over to layer 2, I right click on layer 2 and I go change object layer, and now that rectangle is on the purple layer or layer 2. I can repeat this for the others. Change object layer, change object layer, now they're both on blue, change object layer, put it onto green, change object layer, put it onto the white. And now each one of these rectangles is on its own layer. Now this is really useful because I can lock, hide, and manipulate those layers using these little tools here. So if I click this little padlock option, that means that I'm locking layer 1. So if I click that little padlock there, layer 1 is now locked. What that means is I can't select anything that's on that layer. So this red rectangle here is on layer 1. I can't select it. However, I can still select the other layers and the other objects that are on those layers, but I cannot select the red layer. If I lock a few of the layers, if I lock the blue layer and the white layer, then when I try and select all my objects, only the purple and green layers will be selected because they're still unlocked. And I can change and I can unlock and relock those layers as much as I want. So if I lock the green layer, now I can't select the green layer. It's really useful if you want to begin to edit and manipulate certain objects without editing other objects. Just going to unlock that there. We can also hide layers. So there's a little light bulb corresponding to each layer as well. If I select that light bulb, then everything that's on that layer will turn off. I can do that for my other objects. So selecting that light bulb will turn that layer off, and I can turn it back on again by selecting that light bulb, which is again really helpful if your drawings become really complex and you want to hide certain objects and layers and things. For additional file organization, I can actually begin to name these layers. So if I double click slowly on the layer names, if I double click quickly as well, it also works. So if I go to my layers panel and I double click on the name, it'll highlight and I can rename the layer. So for simplicity, I'm going to call this layer red, and I'm going to go through purple, blue, green, and white. So you can begin to organize your layers even more kind of with a greater organization by naming them. And we're going to set up a default file for you guys to use in this course, which is going to have specifically sort of detailed layer names. Good. So the other thing we can do with the layers panel is we can create obviously new layers. So if I down here, there's a little plus icon here. If you're on PC, there's going to be a little icon over here that looks like a little page, like a little rectangle. If you click on one of those, if I click the plus symbol there, a new layer will pop up. And it'll give me an option to name that layer whatever I want. So I'm just going to call that for now, new layer. And click away, and now I've got another layer. I can also change the color of that layer. So any new layer that you create is going to be default black. If you click on that color, it'll bring up a color wheel, and you can select your own custom color for each layer. So if I select sort of a really, really light blue and I go apply, now that layer is going to be light blue. I can also change the color of the layers that I already have. So for example, this red layer, if I change that color of the red layer to say a really bright green, something like, where's a really bright green? There we go. And go apply. Oh, you almost can't see it. That's probably not a good color to show you with. Let's just go, let's go orange. There we go, go apply. Oh, it's also really hard to see. My apologies. Let's just go with a dark blue. Now the red layer is going to be a dark blue, which is also very similar to this other blue. So you might want to pick more unique colors so you can distinguish between your layers. So let's just go with yellow. There we go. Still a little bit hard to see, but there it is. So you can change your layer colors. You can also get all these preset colors. So any layer colors that you've been playing with before will appear here as kind of like a history of your colors. So I can select that red color there and go apply, and this goes back to red, which is good. The other thing we can do is we can start to select objects by their layer. So if I go over to my layers panel and I right click on the red layer and I go select objects, then everything on that layer will become selected, which is really useful if you've got lots of objects and you've been organizing your file correctly and you want to select everything on one layer. This is a really useful way to do that. So I can select everything on the blue layer, select everything on the green layer, and you'll notice that if I don't deselect it, they actually become all selected at once. So I don't need to hold shift or anything to do that. It'll just do it automatically for me, which is really useful. You can also duplicate layer and duplicate layer objects. So I can create a duplicate of that layer, or I can create a duplicate of the layer and all the objects on that layer. So just for example, on the white layer, if I right click on that and I go duplicate layer and objects, I'm going to get a layer called white copy. Now when I select this, this is something I didn't go over in the last video, but it's really useful. If there's two objects that are over the top or close to each other in Rhino, when you try to select them, it'll give you a little list of the objects that you can potentially select, which is really useful. So if I just hover over that and click it, I'll get a little list of the two objects. That just means that there's two curves here. So if I select one of them, I can move it away, and you'll notice that it's a duplicate of the first object. That's because I created a duplicate white layer. I can also right click that and I can go delete layer, yes, delete, and that layer will be deleted. And I can move my object back there, which is really great. The other thing you can do with layers is you can create layer groups. So if I select a layer here, so if I select my new layer, I can drag and I can move that layer into a different order. So I can change the order of the layers depending on what I want. So maybe you want to order a certain type of layer altogether and have it really neat. You can do that. The other thing you can do is you can click the layer and you can hover it over another layer, and when it's hovering over, it'll appear blue. So if I do that, then that layer will disappear and I get a little arrow that appears next to the red layer. This means I've created a layer folder. So if I select that down arrow, then you'll see that new layer is kind of inside of the red layer. That means I've created kind of a master layer and a sub layer. So if I deselect and hide the red layer, then both of those layers will go off. If I click the light bulb again, then both of those layers will come on. So if I select this layer and I type in, say, circle, and I create another layer there, I can call it line. Interestingly, if I select a sub layer and I create a new layer, then it'll create a new sub layer, which is good. And I can go polyline, or I can go curve actually. So I'm just labeling these as kind of the master commands that I showed you in the last video. So if I select that circle layer and I type in circle, then there we go. I've just drawn a little circle there. I go into my curve layer. I'm going to change that color to, say, a pink. There we go. I'm going to type in curve, draw a curve. There we go. And I select my line layer. And I'm going to make that color to be sort of a bright green. And I go line. This might be a little bit hard to see on the screen. Okay, this is good. So I've accidentally drawn the line on my curve layer because I had it selected as I was drawing. So to change that, I just right click on my line layer and I go change object layer. And now there it is, it's going to appear on the line layer. So whichever one of these layers is selected in this little circle is the layer that you're drawing on. Okay, good. So now I've got my red layer, which is the square. I've got my circle, curve, and line, which is my circle, curve, and line. If I hide my red layer, then they all disappear because the red layer here is the master layer. And then I can also individually turn these layers on and off. I can also right click on the red layer and go select objects, and that'll select everything that's on the red layer, so that rectangle will be selected. However, if I right click there and I go select all, I believe. No. If I go, I think I have to just go, sorry, instead of doing that, I can just click that layer and I can go right click, sorry, hold shift and right click. Then I can go select objects and I'll select everything that I have selected there. I can also close that layer there and so yeah, hide that layer there. That'll help you keep really organized in your layers. I believe that is the basics of layer management. It's incredibly useful skill. So just like how we were doing in the analog drawing task where we were tracing those precedents and creating a new layer for each different type of line, this is essentially the same principle. So you're creating new layers and you can drag them over each other and you can start to get really organized with how your drawing is being created. So if you have a situation, we've got lots of lines that are overlapping, you can keep it really well organized. And like I said, we're going to set up a default file type with specific layers for you to use, and you can add and subtract from that as you wish. Great, so that's the basics of layer management, and I'll see you in the next video.